Walk on the table over these two. Nice to meet you. Your name is? Amber. Very nice to meet you. Hi, Jagmeet. Very nice to meet you.
Mr. Sam,
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Lori Mott's friend.
Very nice to meet you. Pleasure. Is that right?
Hi,
Very nice to meet you.
Hi, Tess.
Nice to meet you. Tess.
Hi.
Nate? Very nice to meet you. Kate. Pleasure to meet you.
Scott.
Scott, good to see you again.
Oh, hey, yes, good to see you.
See you again.
Wow.
Hey, Wendy.
Nice to see you. Last time we chatted, you were like deep undercover in Mexico or something. So, was that accurate or is that?
It was.
So, was that accurate or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Cheers. See you. We shake hands. You shake hands. Well, why not sit again? Hi there. Angela, very nice to meet you.
Hi, Kelsey.
Kelsey, pleasure.
Hi, Johanna.
Johanna,
Nice
very
to meet you.
Pleasure. Hey, Ed, nice to meet you. Very shake hands.
We're just waiting for John Hunter. He's going to give us a second.
All right.
Reporters and editors who are going to ask a question, could you please introduce yourself and your position when you do that?
It's okay. I actually don't drink out of plastic bottles. And I don't drink out of the boxy things either. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
That's pretty good. I know you said that before, haven't you?
The boxy thing I just did. That was the first time I tried it out.
Really?
That's not really my style. I don't know. There wasn't. I don't really. People make little mistakes when they're giving an interview. I don't really want to make a big deal of that. But I definitely. I was on Vancouver Island, and I was meeting with some folks there. And plastics came up, and we were talking about it, and talked about the ocean. I was like, you know what, okay, done. I will at least stop with single-use plastic water bottles, which has been a tough thing to do sometimes because it's hot summers. But I've been pretty good at it, so I'm sticking with it.
You finding another way to hydrate?
Yeah, I carry a bottle with me. Pretty easy.
So are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
All right. So NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is here with the Star's editorial board and other editors and journalists from the Star. I'm the Star's politics editor, Jordan Himmelfarb. We have invited federal party leaders to come talk to us in this pre-campaign period about an issue about which they are personally passionate, and Mr. Singh, thank you very much for making time to join us today. Some of your rivals will be coming in the weeks ahead to talk about their own issues. The issue that you have chosen to talk about is Canadian youth and the anxieties they face and what government might be able to do to ease those anxieties. So how this works, as you know, since you've done it before, is that you'll make a brief opening statement sort of touching on why you care so much about this issue and why you think it's so important. And then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'll open up the discussion to my colleagues. So why don't you take it away?
Sure. Youth are getting, I would say they're getting a raw deal. And they're feeling all of the crises or the struggles that we're faced with in the most acute way. So there is a growing sense of worry about the future, uncertainty in the future in terms of employment. There's growing sense of worry about climate crisis. There's unpredictability around whether people can find a home. So all these concerns are actually felt most acutely, most powerfully, most stressfully on young people. And so they really embody all of the mistakes that have happened over the years where governments have really chosen not to address these priorities that people are facing. And instead, they've seemed to have made a priority working on making life easier for the wealthiest, the richest. And as a result, it's made life particularly hard, so hard for everybody, but particularly hard for young people. So they're facing the brunt of it all. They're the ones who are feeling climate anxiety. They're worried about the future. They're uncertain about the future. And I'm confident if we make better choices, we could turn that around. And so that's why that they really represent to me the culmination of all the things that we've done wrong, and the hope of if we make things right, if we do the right things now, we can actually turn that fear and anxiety into hope and optimism and this a positive outlook on the future, whereas right now it's not. And so that's why that's a really important issue to me. And I spend a lot of time speaking with young people. And I remember when I was young, I might have had some worries, but I was hopeful and excited about the future. And I don't see that same hope and excitement for the future in the eyes of young people now. I see a lot of anxiety and worry and fear, and that really bothers me. And so I really want people to know that with me, I'm going to make sure that their concerns are heard, and that we put forth some solutions that will make their lives better and their futures better.
So one of the challenges faced by any politician who wants to do right by kids is that kids and the not yet born don't vote.
That's right.
So given that, and given sort of the human bias towards short-term thinking, how do you make long-term policies that will benefit only kids and their kids politically saleable?
So one of the things I think that young people have an advantage where they can't vote, yes, but a young person probably has some parents. They probably have some grandparents. And so maybe depending on the structure of their family, up to, maybe more, 2 parents, and maybe 4, if not maybe more, in now modern contexts with different forms of marriage and ways people get together. So maybe 4 grandparents. That's 6 people that a young person can connect with and say, hey, I'm worried about these things. Please vote this way if you care about my future, if you care about what I'm faced with. And I think that's a pretty persuasive thing. If you have a grandchild, a granddaughter, or a grandson come up to you and say, hey, I'm worried about this. Please vote this way so that I'm not going to feel these fears or these worries. I think it's pretty powerful. And I do agree, though, that there is a difficulty making longer-term planning in our short-term election spans and our short-term memory, and it's tough to make an argument for longer-term visions, but we have to. And I think it's not really an option. Like, to make the right decisions, it's going to take longer-term planning, and as hard as it is, I think it's worth fighting for.
And so the answer is, at least in part, getting kids to exert some sort of moral pressure on their parents and grandparents who can vote. There may be a challenge in that there's this view that kids in general are not, and youth in general are not that politically engaged. Is that, do you see that? And if so, what can politicians do to actually get young people to care about politics?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I would say historically that has been the case. Young people haven't been involved in politics, and they haven't been as engaged in decision making or in participating that way. But I think that we're seeing a change in that. There's been recently with the climate change, climate crisis, protests, there's been a mass increase in activity. Young people are really getting involved now. We're seeing big turnouts in these climate rallies. There's another massive one planned for Montreal where they think they're going to break the record with hundreds and thousands of kids coming out. So there's actually a growing movement of activism amongst young people. And the way to tap into that is there is cynicism on one hand when people see that there's nothing that happens, when they see a commitment made, but then they now don't really feel like they can believe a particular politician because commitments were made not followed through on. So I think we've got to fight cynicism with just being honest and being straight up and saying, this is my priority and this is what I'm going to focus in on and I'm going to do it. So tackling cynicism kind of goes along with it. But the kind of the angst and the worry and the anxiety is translating into action. And I think there's a great opportunity for leaders to say, well, let's be honest with these young leaders and say, we can work on those solutions. Here are some solutions to your problems. And particularly addressing what people are going through instead of avoiding it, meeting it head on, saying, yes, you are worried about housing. I'm going to commit to making sure housing is more affordable. You're worried about the future of the economy. We're going to build more supports in place so that there isn't the same precarity and fear. We're going to change the way we envision our employment insurance so that precarious and part-time work is protected. And let's increase our healthcare system to give folks the benefits that they don't otherwise have now, because those benefits aren't available.
All right, let's dig into some of those issues. I'll open it up to my colleagues.
Mr. Singh, you're talking about how youth can influence political leaders through their parents. But why aren't political leaders listening to them? There's rallies on climate change around the world every single week held by children and youth. There's rallies for gun control in the United States that have been massive, but nobody's doing anything.
Yeah, it's worrying to me that people aren't listening to kids. I mean, it's trite to say it, but it's so real. Like, kids are literally going to be the next leaders. They're our future for so many reasons. I'm doing my best to listen. I get that young people are telling me they're worried about tuition fees, and I think back, it wasn't that long ago. I like to believe it wasn't that long ago that I was a young person facing those same struggles. And it was a lot easier for me. Like, I went to law school and it was like $8,000 a year. And now if a young person wants to go to law school, I mean, it's pushing $30,000 a year for many law schools. So just imagining a 3-year tuition for a law school, that's $90,000. That's not attainable for so many people. It wouldn't have been attainable for me at that time. I was going through a lot of tough times myself. So I put myself in the shoes or in the experiences of young people and say, yes, we've got to address those problems. And that's why our New Deal is very much structured towards addressing those challenges that young people are facing. Housing being a big concern. And why aren't people listening? Maybe it's that cynicism that maybe for other political parties, there's a certain segment of the population that they can speak to and they don't have to speak to young people to continue to be reelected. But I don't think that's the way we should be running our country. I don't think that's the way politics should work. I think we need to make decisions that make sure that we're not speaking to only one group. We're trying to find the best solutions that help everybody, and young people are a big part of that. Everybody.
Do you think they're being dismissed?
I think they have been, absolutely, and that's why I'm going to make it a big part of my work, not to let that happen, and to make sure that they're listened to, and that not just listened to, but their work and the concerns that they're raising are addressed. And that's why we're really working hard to make sure those problems that I hear every day about people worried about their future, we've got a plan to ease that worry and to alleviate it and replace it with some hope and some optimism with some of the concrete things we're proposing.
Can I go one more? You mentioned the challenges you faced paying for tuition, but I'm just wondering if there's other challenges that you face that you can identify with what the youth of today are going through.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I didn't think about this as a kid. Healthcare wasn't a thing for me. That was something that I worried about. But when we went through some hardships, my dad felt really ill to addiction, wasn't able to continue working, lost his private insurance. And then we were at a point where we didn't have housing, where we lost our home. And I had to call up relatives to say, hey, can we live with you? My mom was dealing with my dad's addiction and trying to support him, and wasn't able to make some of these decisions. So it was kind of on me as the eldest, and I was in my 20s. I didn't really know what I was doing, but having to find a place to live, I didn't know where to go. And I remember that anxiety and that fear, and I felt the pressure. Like, if I didn't find a place, I meant my brother and sister younger than me would have nowhere to live. So I felt that fear and that worry. And I know that that's what young people feel now, that they're not going to be able to leave their home. Going to university, I remember meeting someone in Vancouver, and they were excited about university, but they were worried because they couldn't find a place to live. They were trying to find a place that was affordable, and they couldn't find a place to live, and that was the reason why they weren't going to go to the school that they wanted to go to. And I was just like, that's sad. That's just not right. So I remember some of those same fears of housing, that housing insecurity, and the bills, how expensive bills can be. When my dad was sick, and then my mom, I remember calling me saying, we don't have any more money coming in, so I was taking care of my brother at the time, so you've got to figure out a way to take care of him. And I said, okay, so I went out and found a bunch of jobs, and I was working hard. And I remember a friend had a discount, a friends and family discount at a grocery store they worked at, a local spot. And my brother and him were friends, so he said, hey, I'll give you that discount. And he doesn't know to this day, but that discount that he gave, that he chose to choose us as his friend to give a discount to, was a lot of the reason why we were able to afford groceries. So I remember like some of those worries about not being able to get the food that you need. So those are some of the things I think people are going through, young people are worried about, and I don't want it to be that way.
We're here with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who's talking to the editorial board and other editors and reporters at the Star about the challenges Canadian youth face and what government can do about those. Laurie?
I'm Mr. Singh, and Laurie Monster-Bratt, and I'm the social justice reporter here at the Star. And over the years, during various campaigns, there have been, and private members' bills, there have been politicians who've suggested lowering the voting age to 16. You can get a driver's license at age 16, you can work, and yet you can't vote. Is that something that you would promote during this campaign?
Yeah, it's in our policy book. It's something that we passed it in convention. I absolutely believe, for all those reasons and more, I think if we had more younger voices having an influence on politics in terms of voting, it would change the way decisions are being made, and hopefully it would encourage decisions made in their interest. So I absolutely believe in it. I also think it would help for voter turnout. If the age is reduced to 16, it could be incorporated into education into the high school, and then it would become a part of the culture. Young people would learn how to vote, and then continue to do so. I think one of the problems is that when people are at the age of voting, they're kind of going away to school maybe sometimes, and they're a bit displaced. They're not really sure where to vote. Elections happen in October, and they're often at school. So for those students that might be the most interested in voting, they're in a position where they're like not sure how to vote, and they're not really familiar. Having started doing it at home might encourage more voting, and it might be a way to change the culture.
So why, if this seems like such a good idea, why has it not caught fire? Why do politicians not push this? Why is it not happening?
Well, I'm going to support it, so you probably should ask the ones that aren't going to support it.
Will it be in your platform?
Yeah, it's in our platform.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in our vision. It's in our vision document, and why would they not? Maybe they're afraid of young people having that power, because then they would be held accountable for some of the horrible decisions that other parties like the Conservatives and Liberals have made. Maybe they would feel the repercussion more, and it's not in their interest.
Since Laurie didn't ask about daycare,
That's my next question.
Is that an inside joke? Everyone knows that.
No, it's Laurie's beat. In 2015, you called for the NDP, the federal NDP, called for $15 a day national daycare program. Why is that not on your platform this time? You say you'll spend $1 billion a year to create more affordable childcare spots, but you stopped short of calling for a national universal daycare program. Why is that?
So it's something that we still believe. It's something we've long believed. It's a big part of who we are as New Democrats, absolutely a part of our values, and something that I believe in personally. I've heard so many stories from people where that is a barrier to getting into work and how it impacts women. So I absolutely believe in it, and we're going to continue to advance it. Though we've rolled out our vision document, it doesn't include all the details of our plan, but it's highlighted some of the key elements. So universal daycare will and has always been a big part of what we believe in, and there'll be more to see in the campaign.
So is that something you'll promise during the campaign, as some sort of universal national childcare program?
I could say with confidence that universal daycare will always be a part of our values and something that we're going to talk about in the campaign, but I can't give you the details yet.
Studies have shown that where we in Canada have accessible and affordable daycare, the rates for using that daycare are much higher for middle class and wealthy families, whereas say in Sweden, the pickup rate is almost 100% for all families with kids preschool age. Why do you think that is, and is there anything Canada should be doing? What can Canada do to close that gap?
Yeah, I think there's. So you gave me the Swedish example. I'm more familiar with the Finnish example. I read the Nordic theory of everything, and Anu Partinen talks about the kind of the Scandinavian model, but particularly in Finland. And I think one of the things is once it's accessible, once it's available, and once the quality is at the same level in every community. So she was talking about in her book how it doesn't matter what community you live in. Some people worry about living in a certain community to get the best access to the best schools or better access to better daycares. There's no difference in quality between neighborhoods. I think there might be access and barrier issues if you're in a lower income area. The distance to the center might be further away. I think there's a lot of discrepancies or a lot of inequalities, not just in the services, but when the services are available, the accessibility is different for different communities. So if you're in a lower income, it might be further to get to, it might not be as available. and there might be worries about the quality. And so what we need to do is really make it universal. The quality should be high and the best quality no matter where you live. And I think that will be a part of the way we can ensure that everyone takes it up.
I have a question. Hi. I'm Shri. I write a column on race and gender at the Star, and I'm completing a fellowship on anti-oppression education. So my question is related to education, and although education is a provincial thing, unless you're Andrew Scheer and you're promising rebates for people who go to private schools, that's a different thing. However,
do they not go back on that afterwards too?
They do.
I think, yeah.
So the question I have is about Indigenous students, where the federal government does come in. Given that Indigenous people are the largest growing population and they are many of them are so young, in 2017 the Liberals had an Anishinaabe education agreement that gave greater autonomy to Indigenous people, First Nations in that case. Would you have on your platform any plans, initiatives that would structurally support and fund Indigenous autonomy and jurisdiction over their education?
Quick answer, yes.
Yeah.
A bit more thoughtful answer. Or not that yes is not thoughtful, it is thoughtful, but one of the things that we really believe in, so I think we take a quick step back, the Indigenous communities across Canada have faced a historic and ongoing injustice. It is just horrible. And the impacts of that you see to this day, the inequality, and I'm sure you see it so much in your work. Having been to different communities and reserves, there's so much passion and there's so much potential, and it's so unfair that basic things like having a school is not so basic. In communities that we went to Kasheshewan, and in Kasheshewan, young people don't have the confidence of knowing that they'll have a school to go to. Their school that they had was built improperly, moldy. Doors were unable to be opened because of the shift in the building, because they were built on the wrong type of land, and doors were not able to be opened, so it became a fire hazard. And instead of having the confidence to know that, okay, if our school, like if I was a Toronto kid, or if I was a Windsor, or if I was a Burnaby kid, I would know if my school, there's something wrong with it, there'd be a new school built right away. There would be a question, I'd find a way to go to school. For these kids, that's not the same thing. They were told they had to go to the high school. The high school kids' hours were pushed later. They had a couple hours in the beginning of the day that they went to the high school instead of going to the regular school. And a kid told me when I asked, what's your best part of going to the school? And she said, the hallways. And I was a bit confused. What do you mean the hallways? She's like, well, before we were all in portables, and now in like minus 40 winter, we don't have to get dressed up to go from one class to another. We can just walk in the hallway. Like, that is what a kid was excited about, was the hallway. And that is the plight of what kids are going through. So they absolutely need to have better quality education infrastructure, and that is absolutely a federal jurisdiction. And then in terms of the autonomy and sovereignty, we believe in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it's in our vision. We put it forward as a law. It was passed, but then it didn't pass through the Senate, which was another discussion we could chat about. But in that document, it talks about the autonomy and the sovereignty of Indigenous communities in terms of education and a whole host of other areas, and our laws should reflect that. And so absolutely I believe in communities, Indigenous communities specifically, having the ability to determine what's best for them, and the support that the federal government should give as a partner to work with achieving that.
And so will that be in the platform in terms of education?
So we have, broadly speaking, the United Nations Declaration, and it includes a host of measures, which includes education as well. The specific, that phrase I don't think is there, but it's a part of what we believe in because of the declaration, specifically having talked about education as a part of that declaration.
While we're on the subject of education, I was hoping to get your view on something outside of federal jurisdiction. You were an MPP at Queen's Park during the controversial Liberal overhaul of the sex ed curriculum. You supported that overhaul, but you did rub some in your party the wrong way by saying that education must respect the diversity of beliefs when it comes to educating our children. I was hoping to get your view, not necessarily on the Ford government's sex sex ed curriculum, but at least on the part that allows parents to opt out of any part of the human sexuality component of the curriculum and the inclusion parts, such as gender identity. What's your view of allowing parents to opt out?
Yeah, I'm worried about opting out, and I'll tell you why I'm worried about it. I shared my own experience with being a survivor of sexual violence, and I think that if I had, I'm pretty confident, a lot of the evidence shows this as well. I did a kind of a science degree, so I'm very evidence-based. Having the knowledge and the language and the terminology of knowing our body parts and knowing how to describe what you're going through has been shown as a way to prevent that type of violence from happening, or at least allow you to the means to communicate it to your parents. And so I believe it actually is a tool to prevent violence from happening in young people. And so I'm worried about the option of opting out, because I think it might mean that some young kids might not have the tools and language to be able to prevent, or to at least stop some sort of violence that they might have to endure. And I think that's horrible. I'm really worried about that. I think though that, and I think that applies to all of the curriculum. The curriculum provides tools that would help out kids who are uncertain about how to express who they are, who don't know how to describe what they're going through. So the gender identity components, in addition to the other components, will all be tools that will help kids out. So I think the priority should be, will this help young people? I think yes. And if it will, then I'm worried about the option of opting out, because maybe that young person is missing out on an opportunity to learn something that would help them.
So you think that disallowing opting out, to use a double is consistent with the idea of respecting the diversity of beliefs when it comes to educating children?
Well, I think what's missing in consultation, perhaps, and in communicating the importance of this type of curriculum is not having a lens where language is respected, or how do I put it, where we're not able to communicate the changes in the languages that people speak. So one of the things that was missing in the consultation, which I was worried about, is there's a lot of misinformation that was being spread, and that misinformation could have been addressed if there was the right information about the benefits of this curriculum shared in languages that the community spoke. So put more bluntly, Somali communities, Punjabi-speaking communities, Hindi-speaking communities, Urdu-speaking communities. There wasn't, I don't think, enough of an effort to provide the appropriate information and the evidence for why this is so important in the languages that the minority community spoke, and then that was a big concern. And in addressing that language gap, I think it would have helped some of the resistance by letting people know this is going to help you out. If you know this information is actually going to help your kids out, it's going to save them, prevent them from being a subject of potentially violence. It's actually going to prevent a lot of the worries that sometimes parents have. I think that's what was missing, and that was not which was respected in the previous consultation. But the subject and the essence and the teachings are all very important, and things that I think would benefit young people. Having been someone who's gone through something, I can share that it's absolutely essential that we share those tools with young people.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is here with the Star's editorial board and other editors and journalists at the paper, talking about challenges faced by Canadian youth and what government can do about them.
Hi, Sahar Fatma. I'm a reporter at the Toronto Star. So you're kind of positioning yourself as the person who understands what young people are going through and is listening and will take action on those issues. How are you going to get that message across to them and actually convince them that that's true?
I think the first step is like genuine listening. So hearing what people say, the way it's shown is in the policies that we're putting forward. So we've listened, and our new deal is a new deal for the raw deal that young people are getting, and it talks about solutions to each and every one, I think, of the major problems that young people are faced with. So when a young person who's worried about, has climate anxiety, which is a really good phrase that I heard recently that captures the fear that young people have. They're anxious because they're going to grow up into a planet where they hear all this evidence that it's not going to be potentially hospitable, or at least not the same way that it has been in the past. So they're feeling this anxiety, and they're not really seeing bold action, and they're not seeing bold commitments. Well, we've laid out a really comprehensive vision, the boldest that our party's ever released, where we talk about moving towards a zero emissions future. We talk about investing in public transit, free transit for community municipalities that want it. We lay out a vision for a climate bank to encourage companies that want access to funds to grow their green or renewable or clean energy companies. We lay out a vision for retrofitting homes to reduce emissions and retrofitting buildings. So we've got a clear vision, I think, that responds to that anxiety. When young people tell me they're worried about finding housing, and we're committed to building 500,000 or 500,000 new homes for people to live in, with a focus on rental income, with a focus on cooperative and non-market housing. These are real solutions that are going to help people out. So I'm hoping that in hearing their worries reflected in clear solutions, young people who are really worried will see their fears addressed in our plan, and they'll say, this is a party that gets what I'm going through and is offering some solutions. And I'm hoping that's going to inspire the confidence of young people.
Hey, Jagmeet.
Yeah.
Hey, Jonathan Vincent. You, in your book, you talked about I think you referenced it this morning, about the survivor of
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a karate teacher.
Yep. Taekwondo, yeah.
Why did you decide to take that step and come up with that information, and what do you think in terms of folks who have gone through similar episodes, what do you think it did for folks or survivors?
So I think two things, two specific things. One is, I didn't hear anyone tell me, because I didn't talk about it. I felt a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. I didn't talk to anyone about it. So I didn't hear the words until I was 25 or so, that it wasn't, hey, it wasn't your fault. And it was said really casually by a friend, a really dear and close friend. And when it was said, I was hit with like a ton of bricks, because I knew at that point, by the time I was 25, when I was a kid, I didn't understand it. It happened to me when I was 10. But by the time I was 25, I knew it wasn't my fault. It just wasn't something I could have controlled. But I hadn't heard it from another human being. No one else had ever said the words to me. So hearing it was probably the moment where I first really started to heal from it. And I thought, I went through so many years of my life not ever hearing it because I was afraid to talk about it. If I was able to say that in the book, that, hey, anyone who's gone through this before, there's so many things that you've got to go through. There's one thing I want to make clear: it is not your fault. And I think that's a powerful thing, and it helped me out a lot. I'm hoping that if I had this platform where people are going to pay attention, maybe I could do this thing which would help someone out. So I was hoping that's one thing. The second thing is, as kind of collateral damage, when you go through something like that and you survive it, you kind of feel like you don't deserve happiness in your life. You don't deserve to do well. You don't deserve good things, because you feel tainted, and you feel, if I can use a colloquial, you feel a bit gross, and you feel like it's your own fault. And I was hoping that if someone could read my story and say, hey, a person can go on to try to be Prime Minister of Canada, having been a survivor, I think that maybe would help people feel that they do believe, they do deserve to be loved and to have love in their life, to achieve big things, to do what they want. And I was hoping to achieve those two things.
I'm Sarah, I'm the labor reporter at
Hi,
Star.
Sarah.
You speak about the rise of precarious work, which is a big issue for young people. As Prime Minister, you'd be pretty limited in terms of what you can do to change labor laws that actually impact the quality of work, because most of those laws are provincial. That being said, a lot of young people in the GTA are finding work at Pearson, for example, which is governed by federal labor laws. So I'm wondering if an NDP government would commit to a $15 minimum wage for federally regulated workplaces.
Yes, absolutely, would commit to it. It's in our vision document. We really believe in it, and I think that it is a starting point to hopefully influence other provinces and other territories. We also want to reevaluate the federal labor laws and hopefully set a better standard that then other provinces and territories could follow. But though we can't address the quality of work directly, provincially, because that's a provincially regulated matter, some of the protections that we can provide at the federal level would help out precarious work. So what I mean by that is that because of precarious and part-time work, and you're the expert in this, so I'm not stepping on your expertise, but just to build on what you already know, what we can do is one of the conditions of part-time or precarious work is you don't have benefits. So if we expand the benefits, people don't need to have those private benefits. So one of the things that I'm really proud of in our plan is an expansion of our healthcare system. We say, and I really believe healthcare should cover you from head to toe. And so what that means to me is not just medication coverage, which is a big part of benefits plan, is medication coverage. We want medication coverage for all, universal, public, single payer, a truly universal program. We also want to expand to dental care, vision and eye care, addictions and rehabilitation care. So really complete the circle of our healthcare system. And that is a specific move to help out all Canadians, but I think particularly young people and precariously employed people who don't have those benefits. And then finally, I think our EI system needs to be changed, and that's why we propose changes so that it accounts for precarious and part-time employed folks. So we've got a vision for a 360-hour kind of total, cumulative total, as opposed to having to work consistent hours, and where you can take your 12 best weeks and use that as your benefits. And I think that would directly provide kind of the social network, the safety network that doesn't right now acknowledge that so many workers are temporary or precarious. And so we want to reimagine the safety network to be there for people who are in that reality now. While we're working on solutions to get better quality work, we should be able to provide better quality benefits that respond to the new needs.
My second question is a little less focused on labor. So,
what?
Yeah, sorry.
How is that possible?
I think, I mean, sort of as a young person also, a lot
you can
of,
say it a lot easier than I can.
Our anxieties, I think, cross borders, and they're connected to what's happening in other countries. Our city is very diverse. We have a lot of young workers who have left Central America in particular to come here and work in our construction industries. And I think a lot of people are looking sort of at horror at what is happening along the US border with young people being detained along the border. So I want to know whether an NDP government would suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement to allow more of those young people to safely come to Canada.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that is, I think you described it so well. Like it is real, the pain that I think young people feel when they see fellow young people going through struggles, and that's a beautiful thing that people care that way. And given the Trump administration and the U.S. administration's response to immigrants, their treatment of refugee seekers or asylum seekers, that is so deplorable. I think it's without any question that at this point in time, it is not a safe jurisdiction. So all the conditions are there for us to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, and we absolutely would do that. We think it respects human dignity. It also allows for people who are crossing kind of irregularly across the border into Canada right now don't have a process to be that response is not there because there's not the normal mechanisms that we have to respond to people is not available because they're not technically applying as refugees or asylum seekers because they are coming from a quote-unquote safe third country. And so I think it would respond to the needs of many border communities that are facing an increase, but the people that come are sometimes incredibly talented folks that could contribute if you want to look at it on the other side instead of just the moral importance of respecting human dignity, but there's also a massive potential for us to have this talented group of folks that can contribute to Canada. All of that's not being realized because of this agreement, so we would absolutely suspend it.
Jagmeet Singh, NDP leader, is here with the Star's editorial board and other journalists and editors at the paper to talk about youth challenges and what government can do about them. Kate, do you want to?
Hi, I'm Kate Allen. I'm our science and technology reporter. So Canada has made an international commitment to set aside 17% of its land and inland waters by the end of 2020. And at the end of 2020, it'll likely shift again to something like 30%. So this is a strategy not just to protect biodiversity, but it's also a climate change strategy. I'm wondering what approaches you would use to meet those targets, which are fairly ambitious, other than setting aside national parks.
So to reduce emissions, is that your question?
I'm asking about specifically quickly, reaching the international target under the UN Convention on Biodiversity of protecting 17% of Canada's territory by the end of 2020, and then probably something like 30% by 20. We don't know what the next target will be, but how do we get to these pretty ambitious protected areas targets other than national parks?
This, I think, would impact biodiversity and would protect our coastlines, and that covers a lot of our country. One of the things that we're going to get into more detail later on in the campaign, but one of the things we're seeing is that a lot of cities and a lot of municipalities don't have the infrastructure to adequately treat water, so there's a lot of raw sewage that's being dumped into oceans, and the impact of that on biodiversity has been shown to be pretty significant. It grows certain organisms that can often push out the diversity that we need to maintain and to protect. So one of the things that I envision at the federal level is making investments so that we are never dumping untreated water into any untreated water to any body of water. So whether it's a lake or an ocean, and that would be a pretty bold way to improve the biodiversity or protect the biodiversity of our coastlines, of our natural resources, our water, the freshwater lakes across Canada. And I think it's just really doesn't make any sense that we're just pumping out untreated water. And this would be one of our ways that goes beyond just land mass, but also looks at biodiversity in lakes and water, in oceans and coastline. So that's something that I would like to see us do, something that I'm committed to, and I want to roll out a plan around how we would do that.
So the Liberals have put a fair amount of money into creating Indigenous protected areas. I'm wondering if that would be a priority for you as well.
Yeah, I think that Indigenous communities should be partners, should be sitting at the table and making those decisions, but there's a lot of teachings with First Nations and Indigenous, Métis, Inuit peoples who have a stewardship model for how they interact with the land that we could learn from, and then working in partnership with Indigenous teachings of stewardship, we could work towards creating more protected lands that would help us also protect biodiversity. And there's also a way of life that Indigenous communities rely on that requires an attention to maintaining the health of the surrounding communities in which they live. So there's a powerful motivation and a history of knowledge that we can rely on.
Mr. Singh, I'm Wendy Gillis. I cover crime at the Star. And one of the things that I see is that one of the symptoms of lack of opportunity for young people is that some of them do turn to crime. Mm-hmm. And as you know, we have had quite an issue in Toronto and other cities in Canada with gun violence. And I wanted to know your stance on instituting a handgun ban and further prohibition of assault-style weapons.
So when we first, the handgun ban issue first kind of arose about a year back, we put out a letter to the Prime Minister. I wrote the letter to send to the Prime Minister that any municipality that chooses to ban handguns or any other weapon, if they choose to, we should provide the mechanism or the tools so that they can do so. And so respecting a municipality. So Toronto's a municipality where this is something that the City of Toronto is calling for, they should have the ability to do so. We should respect that. And that's something we called for a year ago. And we maintain that support and that position that municipalities that choose to do so should be able to do so. But we also, and you alluded to this, and I think it's important that I can't respond to the question on banning handguns and giving municipalities the power to do so without going to the broader question. And you alluded to it, so I think it's fair to talk about it a bit. That the ban on handguns itself won't be the solution on its own. And I don't think you were suggesting that anyway, but I just want to build on that. That from all the communities that I've spoken to impacted and people that are experts and people on the ground, they all point to the complexity of the roots of violence. It's not something you can just say, this is the one root of violence. It's complex and it's hard to get to the bottom of it, but it does involve inequalities and lack of opportunities and young people who don't have a bright future and a sense of hopelessness that needs to be addressed. And so those are really the root causes that we focused on in the letter as well, that we need to have federal partnership and funding to make sure we look at those root causes of violence. And there's so many reports that talk about it. There's so many experts and so many community folks that know, these are the things that we need to address. We need to support and fund those programs so that young people have a bright future, And I think all forms of inequality contribute to it. If a young person sees that they can actually afford a place to live, if they see that they have a good job that's lined up for them in the future, if they see that they can afford to pay their bills, if all these things are possible, it reduces the hopelessness, creates an opportunity of kind of optimism and positivity for the future, which are all ways for us to reduce the violence that we're seeing.
So just so that I'm understanding you, is your approach to bans more so supporting municipalities that seek to do so, or is there something that the federal government would be doing as well?
Well, it would be to allow municipalities to have those bans. It would require a federal law that gives municipalities that jurisdiction. So what I'm calling for is at the federal level to give municipalities the power to do so. So not just supporting their demands, but actually changing the law, which is actually the request, is to change the law so that municipalities can do so. And I would commit to doing that.
But you wouldn't force municipalities to do so?
No.
Hi, Mr. Singh. I'm Tess. I cover housing and real estate. As you know, there's particularly in Toronto and Vancouver, housing is at a premium.
Yeah.
There are real concerns that the high cost of housing is affecting people's ability to pay down their household debt and save for retirement. I know you've spoken about your platform focusing on non-market housing and rental income, but can you talk a little bit about ownership homes and how more people can realize that dream?
Sure, yes. So while our biggest focus would be I'd still say our biggest focus is on creating more opportunities for non-market, for rental, for cooperative housing, for people to have a home that they can have the confidence will always be there and not go through the uncertainty of the current rental market. We also believe that we want to keep the dream of home ownership alive. And so to do that, there's, I think, maybe 3 or 4 different steps we could take that would help achieve that. One of the things we want to crack down on is you've seen recent reports around how money laundering has directly increased the cost of housing. And so in BC, they've attributed at least a 5% of the increase in property prices, home prices, to money laundering. So this is something absolutely the federal government can play a role in tackling. In fact, the federal government is probably in the best position to do so. But over the past at least couple years, from the auditor's reports, we found that the money laundering division at the federal level has no one working in the division actually dealing with money laundering. They just have not been given that mandate. So they've got a division, and it has a budget set aside, but it's not been given that mandate to actually go out and do that work. So we would clamp down on money laundering. We also are proposing, similar to what the BC NDP has done, a foreign owner's tax. So if someone is not either a permanent resident or a citizen, there will be a tax that we're going to roll out to tackle some of the inflation pressures that are coming from foreign ownership, which we've seen to work pretty effectively in BC to keep the pricing from going at the kind of the skyrocketing increasing rates. So that's something that's helped cool and control the price of housing. And then what we're looking at is some specific tools to help the first-time home buyers. So expanding the current first-time home buyers tax to allow for more of those costs that people incur outside of the actual mortgage to be covered. So there's a first-time home buyers tax that we would, tax credit that we would double. And we also want to bring back 30-year mortgages, which would allow for people to have a monthly payment that would be within their means and help folks that want to get into home ownership and give them the tools to do so.
Okay.
Mr. Singh, some economists argue that one important way to think about our responsibility to young people and future generations is the amount of debt we saddle them with. Your platform is a big spending platform, $10 billion on pharmacare, $1 billion a year on childcare, and much more. Do you see a path from this plan to balance budgets?
So I would look at the question as using the public dollars very responsibly, and I take it very seriously. And I would make different choices that would help us achieve our results. So the different choices in the past year, the federal Liberal government under Mr. Trudeau purchased a pipeline for $4.5 billion. That's not something that we consider a priority, and now they want to expand it with a potential price tag of 15 billion or more. It's unclear if it's going to be exactly that much. So that's already a $20 billion commitment there. They put forward a corporate tax cut in the fall economic statement that was worth about $14 billion, which allows powerful and wealthy corporations to buy private jets and other forms of transportation and other write-offs that accumulated in a $14 billion write-off. Again, not a choice that I would make. I'd also look at the revenue side. I've proposed a number of ways to raise revenue and ask those at the very, very top to contribute a bit more. And I think Canadians would agree that that makes sense, that people at the very top should be paying their fair share. So some of the things we're asking to do is closing some loopholes, like the CEO stock option loophole, clamp down on offshore tax evasion. Right now, it's as simple as a company can send money from Canada, a Canadian company can send money overseas, and there's really no checks and balances. Whereas if you apply as a regular Canadian taxpayer, if you send your money or if you pay for your taxes and you put in a claim, the CRA will ask you to prove that claim within 90 days. Often with offshore or larger multinational or powerful corporations or wealthy corporations at the top, they are not audited for years, a year or 2 years. In addition, we put forward a very simple private members bill that would say that if you send money offshore, there should be a requirement that at the location where the money is being spent, there's proof that there's actually employees there, there's workers there, there's something that is not a shell company. Bill put forward by Mary Rankin that was voted down by Liberals and Conservatives. Something very simple that would have helped us clamp down on offshore tax havens. And finally, we've got a wealth tax that asks those who are at the very, very top, those who've got a net wealth of over $20 million to pay 1% on their wealth. These are measures to help increase revenue. We would make better choices with the revenue and be serious about the dollars and responsible at the dollars that we're being entrusted with, and make choices that invest in people, as opposed to the decisions that we've seen so far that have really invested in making life easier for multimillionaires.
But would you have a plan that you would state publicly to return to balance at some point, some particular point?
Yeah, so our focus, our focus is on, we want to live within our means, and that's something very important, and we should always make sure we've got a path to living within our means. But for New Democrats, that never means in any way looking at austerity. It means looking at how we can use the dollars that we're given with responsibility to invest in people first, instead of putting the priority on making life easier for multi-billion-dollar corporations and giving them tax cuts. We put our investments in people, and then raise revenue to be able to live within our means. And I think Canadians expect that, but not at the cost of austerity and not at the cost of giving more and more handouts to those who are already doing so well.
Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your finding the time in this busy season. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. It was awesome to spend time with you all. Thank you very much. An honor to be here.
Thank you.